It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Boston Fed for this really critically important conversation. You know, when I think about the Spotlight series and when I think about the Color Wealth Report that I'm going to talk to you very briefly about, the word that comes to mind is magnitude. This topic seems to have a sense of urgency because disparities are just so huge. How's my slides? I'm going to wait. We're still on the title slides. It's okay. Disparities are so huge, and then because the remedies have to be multifaceted and they have to be done in a way that address systemic root causes of how we ended up here. So in our department, Regional Community Outreach, we work in 3 focal areas. The first one is the growing small industrial cities, increasing employment opportunities, and then the third focal area is advancing household economic security and equity for our low and moderate income communities. And so I'm going to give you an overview of our research and engagement efforts around reducing the racial wealth inequality that falls under this third focal area and where I do most of my work. Oh, okay, third slide, second slide. So the genesis of this work really comes from wanting to understand what is happening in the Boston metro area in terms of racial wealth disparities for the diverse makeup of our residents. We knew from past research that the racial wealth gap, racial wealth inequality existed, right? We knew that. And we knew that the wealth gap was bigger than the earnings gap alone. So just to give you a sense, right, when you're looking at the differences between African American and white populations, 60 cents to a white dollar in earnings becomes 6 cents to a white dollar in wealth. Right? So it's huge. And so we knew that wealth was a really important indicator that allows us to see how communities of color are disproportionately disadvantaged and is the indicator by which the 2 communities are the most inequitable. Income gives you a snapshot in time, right? But wealth is about your long-term financial stability that allows you to do things like invest in education, invest in starting a business, owning a home, weather unforeseen financial shocks. And the inability to do that, right, is, despite the stereotype, an overwhelming reason why most people fall into poverty. So not bad decisions, unforeseen financial shocks. So looking at wealth is really important because it allows us to see just how much communities of color are disproportionately disadvantaged. Again, we knew that the gap exists nationally, but we needed to find out what the racial wealth gap looked like in the Boston area by race and ethnicity. So in 2015, we partnered with the Ford Foundation, Duke University, the New School on the Color of Wealth report that examined differences in wealth, assets, debts by race and ethnicity. And very much so in line with the national trends, our sample yielded large disparities by race and ethnicity that get very pronounced when you examine wealth, right? So for example, when you only look at income, I just think slide animations are magical. I just do. So look, I'm going to show you income. So when you look at income, right, we see large differences in income, and we see that on average, U.S. blacks earn $50,000 less than whites from the sample, right, and that Dominicans earn $53,000 less than whites. So huge disparities, but that's not the whole story, right? When we layer on wealth, we see even deeper differences, right? So the story isn't necessary. So I'm gonna add on wealth. The $8 an hour and the $0, $8 in wealth and $0 in wealth, that's a huge part of the story. But the bigger part of the story is the differences, the massive differences that persist in line with the national trend, right? So again, look at this. These are the wealth differences from our sample. So when we layer on wealth, we see deeper disparities. What was the $50,000 a difference in income now becomes a gap of $250,000. Right? This is why looking at wealth is so important. From research to action, right? Right after the report came out, we convened a working group tasked with coming up with Boston-specific strategies around the racial wealth inequality around reducing it. And we, the Boston Fed, were really intentional about wanting the group to drive their own priorities and name and frame the issues. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what came out. We had 30 plus cross-sector partners who came together at the table, some of whom are in this room. And so thank you so much for being a part of the working group, who embarked on a 7-month learning process. Practitioners, researchers, academics, were all in the room together. The work group actually ended up releasing a shared agenda for their vision of reducing the racial wealth gap in Boston. And there were some overarching themes that the group came up with. The first one is the importance of wealth, not just income, for all the reasons that we just said. The importance of changing the narrative, painting a positive picture of what the world could look like, what Boston could look like. But in that changing the narrative, really focusing on breaking myths around solutions and showing that if I just do everything right, work hard and save more and get an education, it still may not be enough, and it probably still won't close the gap. Data tells us. To talk about the racial wealth inequality as being structural, not behavioral, and to talk about remedies that require addressing root causes and structural barriers that have disproportionately prevented communities of color from accessing the same opportunities as white communities. All right. And so I'm going to leave you with that insight from the working group, and I just want to wish you a terrific event, and thank you so much for having me and having us. Thank you.